Welcome to the Delmarva Almanac. Each week we connect you to the best of Delmarva. I'm your host, Dana Kester McCabe. Oyster season is now underway, and news reports say that many of the oysters harvested so far have been disappointing. However, watermen have hopes that things will improve. Here's an updated story from our archive about the history of this quintessential Delmarva seafood. Charlie Petrucci is an historian and former game warden who lectures about our seafood heritage and has organized a local seafood festival or two. I asked him to tell me the story of America's love affair with the oyster.
So fishing heritage has roots in tourism. I mean, even if you look back, the beginning of tourism on the Eastern Shore started post-Civil War. You know, and a lot of it came out of the misery and loss of the Civil War. There were certain things that happened in the late 1860s, early 1870s. Cities became crowded. Alcoholism became a way of life for a lot of people. Tuberculosis was on the rise. And so people wanted out. They wanted to escape. And this is where you saw towns like Atlantic City, New Jersey, Ocean City, Maryland, and so on and so forth began to give rise to tourism, vacationers, people coming down to spend time on the beaches. And the men who fought in that war, camaraderie that was established, they began to form hunt clubs, to come together as a group, and not so much because of the hunting, the weapons and things like this, but it was a chance for them to get away and be who they were when, say, they had served their time in the Army. And so this was also part of a vacation in tourism development as well. And so, we saw this rise of recreation, which was hunting and fishing as part of people coming out of cities. You see the old photographs of people on the beaches, and whether it's in vacationing in hotels on Wallops Island or Wachapreague, or certainly up in Ocean City and Fenwick, where you have folks holding up fish, long stringers of trout, red drum and black drum. And obviously that was part of their vacation, where things like the beach swimming was not, getting tan lines was not so much of an important issue. So fishing heritage here has its roots that go back, 150 years. And it has developed slowly in the 1920s. You started seeing the rise of sport fishing taking place, the cities growing in population, ethnic groups coming in, again, post-Civil War, and they brought a lot of their desires in culinary areas, and so they were looking for those fish they enjoyed, say, around the Mediterranean, along the coast of Ireland and Holland and whatever, and so America had great opportunity for seafood development, and so those paralleled as well with tourism and also the rise of culture in America. So fishing in this area, both commercial and sport fishing, I think were important, for cultural development and also economic development.
You're listening to the Delmarva Almanac. I'm Dana Kester McCabe, and Charlie Petrucci is telling us about how the oyster became so popular.
After the Civil War, this tremendous love affair arose, and we could not get enough oysters in this country, and oyster houses opened up everywhere. Chicago and San Francisco and New York, and you saw pictures of miners out in Arizona and the Dakotas, and these rough-honed men with pickaxes and shovels, behind them a mound of oyster shells. Like, how the hell did they get oysters out here? Well, it was the trend. It was a sign of wealth, status in many cases to eat oysters, but also it was the food of the common man. Just like hot dog stands in New York, you'd belly up to the stand on the street where they're roasting oysters or shucking them raw, and they're a penny a piece or two for a penny, nickel beers. And, we just couldn't satiate the market. And this is part of the demise of the oyster in the beginning. And New York City, for example, had over 1,000 oyster houses. 1,000, that's a lot. Today there's only one left. It's called the Oyster House, and it's in Grand Central Station. And it's still there. It's from, I believe, 1886. So, the oysters have been an iconic species product, a seafood product for Americans for a long time.
There are folks who can taste the difference between a Pacific or Olympia oyster from the American West Coast or an East Coast Maine pemmiquid. Charlie says it's all about the water.
I think here in the Eastern Shore, our claim to fame is the salt oyster. And that term is derived from the fact that oysters are one of those species that can tolerate huge swings in salinity. So you find oysters along the coastal corridor in the back coastal bays, certainly, with high salinity, but you also find them far up the Chesapeake Bay, Rock Hall and above. So they have evolved to tolerate big swings in salinity. But because, again, the seafood is only as good as the water comes from, also the water imparts flavor as well. So coastal oysters, high salinity, are going to be saltier than oysters, saying, coming far up the bay or the Gulf of Mexico during the rainy season. And that will dictate price. That'll command a higher price, your saltier oysters. So Chincoteague salts became famous.
That was Charlie Petrucci in a story we did previously on oysters. One aspect of their history in our region that Charlie did not go into was the notorious Oyster Wars. As early as 1719, Delaware and New Jersey set up a leasing system to regulate the oyster beds in the Delaware Bay estuary. In 1830, the states of the Chesapeake region began restricting fishing in their waters to their state residents. But competition was steep, and watermen had trouble acknowledging state lines when they were out on the water. Confrontations on the Chesapeake escalated into violence. In 1868, in order to enforce the law and police the conflicts, the state of Maryland created the Maryland Oyster Navy, which eventually became the Maryland Natural Resources Police. Many notorious incidents of this turbulent period have been recorded. One minor escapade that I found amusing happened on March 4th, 1883. The Virginia Fisheries Police heard that the Dancing Molly, a Maryland oyster pirate ship, was hanging out near one of their inlets. With no activity on deck, they thought the captain was ashore and mistakenly thought the ship was an easy target. However, the wife and daughters of the captain actually were on board, and in response to the police gunfire, those expert lady sailors had no trouble getting back to the safety of Maryland waters, much to the surprise of their would-be captors, who actually cheered when they slipped across the state line. Hostilities over oyster territories continued until 1959, when a waterman caught in the act of illegal dredging was shot and killed by a Virginia Fisheries Police officer. This shocked all involved into ending the so-called Chesapeake Oyster Wars. Today, the commercial oyster season runs from October 1st through March 31st. The 3 states in our region regulate where, how many, and what size oysters watermen can harvest. The first month of the season is reserved for people using hand tools like tongs to bring up the shellfish. During November, things open up for the dredging operations. On the Chesapeake side, in Virginia, some watermen feel that there are simply too many licenses issued and too few beds open for them to harvest from. In Maryland, watermen have similar sentiments. According to NOAA statistics, in 1880, there were about 75 million pounds of oysters landed in the Maryland portion of the Chesapeake Bay. In recent years, that number hovers at or below about 400,000. The environmental group, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, refers to the oyster beds as the coral reef of the Chesapeake Bay. As water filters, they are critical to the long-term health of the estuary, and their success as a species is a key indicator in judging the state of that health. Early in the 2000s, the Oyster Recovery Partnership was founded to help restore and grow the Chesapeake oyster fishery. Oyster shell recycling and aquaculture oyster farming projects are now underway around the region. Scientists and volunteers are trying to replant oyster spats to revive old beds. It takes a couple of years for the spats, or juvenile oysters, to mature. Marine fishery scientists carefully monitor their progress and the diseases that could devastate an annual crop. In 2015, President Barack Obama signed Executive Order 13508, an extension of the Clean Water Act of 1972, calling the Chesapeake Bay a national treasure and ordering the restoration of oyster populations in 10 of its tributaries by 2025. Oysters in the Delaware Bay are also being cared for through the efforts of groups like the Delaware Bay Oyster Restoration Task Force. Writer Jonathan Swift is quoted as musing, "He was a bold man that first ate an oyster." In fact, there are many ways to eat oysters: raw, steamed, roasted, fried, or stewed. I enjoy just about all of them, though my favorite is roasted on the grill. Here's hoping that scientists and watermen continue to work together to assure the perpetuation of this species, which is so important to our environment, our economy, and our culture. If you'd like to find out more about this topic, visit our website, delmarvaalmanac.com/food. We'll have links to information about oysters and their history, as well as a recipe for oyster stuffing. Well, that's all for this edition of the Delmarva Almanac. Be sure to follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and next week join us to learn more about our local culture and get connected to our natural wonders. We'd like to thank our community partners, the Friends of Delmarva Public Radio, and our underwriters for their help in bringing this program to you, our audience. If you'd like to become an underwriter for this program, visit delmarvaalmanac.com/support. Our theme music was provided by Brightside Studio. This show has been a Moonshell production. Thanks for listening. Until we meet again, may the rhythms and tides of Delmarva bring you good fortune.